Hello and welcome back to the Moto Mind channel. I'm Shoma Göber, professional racer from Hungary, and today I'm the only one participating in this special event. Today's topic is the, drumroll please, MotoGP versus Formula 1 tracks. Let's get into it. So, as we know, Formula 1 and MotoGP is the pinnacle of motorcycle racing, or motorsport in general. I'm both a huge Formula 1 fan, but mainly a MotoGP fan. So today we're going to dive deep into why these bikes and cars can't race on the same track at the same year. So, I hope if you're in this channel, you actually saw a motorcycle Formula 1 race before. If not, if you're a newbie, then it's absolutely right. So we start from the beginning. We start with the Formula 1 cars, have four absolutely huge tires, which you can see big front, rear wings, and of course, back in the day, ground effect cars. So they generate an enormous amount of downforce, which helps them rotate the car in the corners much faster than MotoGP. Whereas a MotoGP, I'm going to take the Repsol Honda because I like this livery so much, and of course it's Marc Marquez, which is the best, of course. You see, we have much wider tires, front and rear, and of course when the bike is leaning into the corners, the amount of grip going to the ground is like half a centimeter, 1 centimeter from the tire, in the peak lean angle, which is absolutely small. It's between life and death sometimes. However, due to this, you have to be really cautious, and you have to understand the limit of the bike. Hence why we need much bigger areas to crash if you crash. So that's the main reason why this is so different, and the tracks are so different, and the rules are so different for these two championships. So it's also very important. I actually wrote a presentation about this in university, that why MotoGP bikes are they need much more care about the tracks than Formula 1 cars do, especially curbs. Like Formula 1 cars use sausage curbs, the big green curbs, and basically anything that comes into the way. However, MotoGP bikes, or motorbikes in general, because I can speak from Moto3, Moto2, and Moto4 superbikes, doesn't like the curbs that much. Of course, the main curb it does, because you have to use it. But the green curb in some corners and some places are really hard, and I also broke a rim 2 times in Misano due to this. And also sausage curbs, where we can basically fly off and be a motocross rider for a few seconds, and then we crush a big one. So that's the main reason why MotoGP bikes need much more care on the track, and they use it much more open tracks than Formula 1 cars do. So the main reason is basically safety, and that's the most important in our culture, especially in today's world where everything happens so fast, everything goes so fast, and technology is so advanced that we have to focus on safety. That's why MotoGP can't race on steel. So as you may know, safety is the main concern in the motorsport, and it is absolutely right. It should be the main concern, and it is absolutely fair play. And that's why MotoGP bikes ultimately can't race on steel circuits, because we don't have the carbon fiber shell around us that the Formula 1 guys have. So ultimately, they tend to race in different circuits compared to MotoGP. So hence why, as you already mentioned, the racing is quite different. Formula 1 cars, they tend to use much longer straights than MotoGP bikes do, because normally they use much more street circuits like MotoGP and more motorcycle racing, except the TT Le Mans doesn't use street circuits. And for example, Baku, they have a really long straight where they can use the advantage of the DRS, the rear wing system, which they can even give an advantage on the other, because otherwise overtaking in a Formula 1 car is really hard. Whereas in MotoGP, from my point of view, and from many other riders, we like the fast flowing tracks like Phillip Island, Assen and Sassuring, which is just so amazing to ride in these fast corners with, like, you have 4th gear full gas, and you really feel the bike under you. Whereas I'm not a guy who like this long straight, big stop, chicane corner kind of tracks. So hence why this is a big difference. And also crashing into the barriers is a part of the sport in Formula 1. Whereas in MotoGP, if you crash, it's much bigger of risk, because you have no surroundings, as I mentioned before. So this is the main reason why we can't race in Monaco and Baku, for example. So actually, Bordeaux uses a different kind of one-of-a-kind technology, which is the complete asphalt runoff with some very harsh paintings on them. And of course, when the car slides around in Port Ricard and it starts to slip around, the blue painting and also the red painting, which is even more harsh, stops the car into the barrier in a good way. Of course, we see Leclerc getting the barrier, but most of the time it stops the car. However, I had an accident in Paul Ricard and I crashed, but you don't stop until the barrier, neither does the bike, because you have such less contact patch. If you crash the bike, it's basically that the fairing is touching the ground, which doesn't have much ground to touch it. Even though if you have wings on, it's even less, because the wings are, to be honest, quite strong and they are quite hard to break. And of course, the rider, if you're crashing at high speed, and Bordeaux is a really, really fast track, I managed to get my top speed there, the ultimate top speed of 394 kilometers per hour. And if you are crashing at that speed, that heat that this generates just it rips your skin off. Even though if you're in a very good suit, and of course we will talk about it later. So right now we're talking about the Bordeaux and the Paul Ricard circuit, and it would be an absolute criminal mistake if you don't click the pop-out banner up here to watch my latest vlog about the Bordeaux and look at this here, what happened, how it went. So click it, watch it, enjoy it. So MotoGP bikes need gravel ultimately, which slows the bike down perfectly, and also the rider. And it's a really strict rule about these, which is ultimately good for us. But there's also very important rules for the gravel, which is the size of a gravel cannot be more than 3 to 6 millimeters. Of course, not to damage the rider when you are flying around in a gravel, because if you make a high sider, you are very lucky if you know to do this when you crash. But ultimately, you don't want to get bruised by stones hitting your body, and also not damaging your bike, not to crack your radiator open or anything else. So hence why this is very important for bikes, whereas with Formula 1 cars, again, much more versatile. So basically, we can say that from all what we know yet, Formula 1 cars adapt to MotoGP bike circuits, and that's why it is like this. I'm gonna give you an example in really quick about Hungarian racing and racing tracks. What's the difference and why can we race in each track? So please, my little helper, can you give me the board, please? So this is one of my favorite tracks of all time. This is the pinnacle of tracks in my opinion. I do really, really like it. I unfortunately haven't managed to roll it many times, but when I did, it's absolutely unreal. It's really fast flowing. It has big braking zones. But it got the parts where you really need to get in the flow and just make 5 corners the best. And that's what I do really like, because it really depends on the rider. If there are tracks where you have big braking zones, and some guys are really strong in the braking zones, whereas there are these tracks like Hungaroring where you have to get the first corner right to make the whole section right. And this is really key for me when I decide that I like a track or I dislike a track. And as you may know, MotoGP visited Hungary this year in Balaton Park. Both Superbike did, and I had the chance to ride in Balaton Park, which in my honest opinion doesn't make for MotoGP or Superbike racing. I rode the BMW M1000RR in the circuit, and I haven't put a gear more up than 4th gear, which is strange for me, because we always go up to 5th and 6th in at least racetracks. It's really a stop and go racing circuit where you put the gas on, you brake really hard as you can, then you make a chicane, and then you do the same again for. So ultimately, Balaton Park is a really stop and go track, and there are a few tracks where you have actually many tracks where you feel good in the end of the race because it's flowing and it takes less stress to your body. But for example, in Balaton Park, at the end of the day, I had complete pain in my arms, trying to stopping and holding my weight in the braking zones, because all you do normally is just brake, unfortunately. So it's more of a car track, but for cars it's also not ideal, unfortunately. Hungaroring would be a great motorcycle racing track, but unfortunately it's dangerous for MotoGP bikes. And please let me know in the comments if you think Balaton Park is made for MotoGP bikes and motorcycle racing in general. Let me know in the comment section. And now let's talk about the tracks which share each other. So say the cerbs category, which is Silverstone, Qatar, Barcelona, and etc. And these tracks are all made for MotoGP. However, MotoGP tracks can be used by Formula 1, but Formula 1 can be used by MotoGP. So there is no point of crazy solutions for making the bike slower, for making it more safety. So there is Silverstone, for example, you have the big straights where Formula 1 can overtake, but you have that Magos, Beckers, Shepherds. I hope it's third like this, where you can really get into the flow and go fast. And of course, in Formula One, there's also big crashes. Like, you remember 2021 Max Verstappen versus Lewis Hamilton. He ended up in the barrier and he got out, which is really lucky. But still, of course, there's a danger, but the factor is much less. So that's the reason why we can share these tracks, because they are built for MotoGP. And normally, the track organizers are really keen to keep the track in the calendar, because it's the pinnacle of motorsport. So they listen to the riders. And I for example, both Silverstone and Texas, the riders were complaining about the asphalt surface, because ultimately the bumps are really scary. It's probably the most scary thing for bikes, because it's just unpredictable. And when you're riding a lean angle for 61 degrees, you don't want to go over a bump because it's really dangerous and you can crash from nowhere. And so they refurbished the asphalt in Silverstone completely, and then they just make some patches in Texas. In Texas is quite honest. So with the bumps, MotoGP bikes struggle a lot. We also struggle a lot, both mainly all categories, especially smaller ones. With big bikes like MotoGP Superbike, it's a little bit harder to feel, but it's still there. Whereas with the Moto2 and Moto3, it's really different. It's really hard to control, especially Moto3, because the bikes are so light, and you feel, if you go over a penny in the racetrack, you feel it in your bum, in your ass, because the bike is so tense, and you feel everything, and this is why it's really dangerous, and you can crash from one moment to another. Whereas with Formula 1 cars, of course, they have really rigid suspensions, almost nothing. Like, of course, know this year that McLaren invented the anti-dive, which is like almost no suspension movement whatsoever. However, because of the four tires, which are much bigger, they have an ultimate traction, which results in bumps there, bumps here. Of course, you feel it, but it doesn't really matter to them, because just go over it. Whereas MotoGP bikes are much more fragile to this, and much more. They need more care about. The MotoGP bikes are much more sensitive to everything. That's why they need a much better surface. So ultimately, for a racing circuit to attend both categories, they have to make the MotoGP rules make for Formula 1s. So of course they can make a minor tweaks about sausage curb here for Formula 1 cars and some places, but ultimately it's the gravel track that matters and the crashing zones. And of course, if Formula 1 cars want to race on a flowing track, it's all fine to them. So after we deep dived to this whole mess of MotoGP and Formula 1 tracks, let's summarize this a bit, so I hope you get an understanding and knowledge about the tracks. So, if the MotoGP wants to race on a track, there's an FIA grading for the safety rating of 5, which is the maximum where they can race. I think it's the same for superbikes, but I'm not totally sure, but I do think so. Is the same? Yeah. It's the same. Good. And so, to be able to race on Formula 1 tracks with MotoGP bikes is basically impossible in many places, but Formula 1 can race in MotoGP tracks. And the key differences are the air fences, the gravel runoff, the big crashing zones, and the flowing circuit types, which of course Formula 1 cars doesn't favor in terms of the show. Of course, riders favor it, but the show dictates it needs overtakes and needs crashing and needs attraction. So they use much more street circuits. It's a one-way road basically, where Formula 1 cars can join a MotoGP racing track, but in the back way, that is not possible. I hope you enjoyed the video. Please give it a like and subscription, and we'll see you on the next one.